The meaning is the instinct that guides you in life across the totality of life, right? What's expedient, that's what you might want to do right now in an impulsive sense, right? Because you're driven forward by, anger or anxiety or frustration or disappointment or despair, some sort of one-eyed motivational monster that's got you in its grip that really isn't considering everything at once, right? Like considering your life tomorrow or your life next week or your family's life or maybe even your well-being half an hour from now, because you lash out in anger, and you can, people do that. It's understandable. Sometimes it's even necessary, but it's not wise generally. And the instinct for meaning seems to be a consequence of the integration of all of those underlying motivations and emotions with social being, and then the manifestation of something like the proper pathway forward. And you need that because you need to know how to move forward in life, because you need to move forward in life. You need to act in life. And we're not fundamentally creatures who passively perceive the objective world. That's not the goal of our perceptual systems. It's not the goal of our memory. The reason that you have memories isn't to remember the past. The reason you have memories is so that if something bad happened to you in the past, you can figure out what it was that was bad, and you can figure out why it happened, and then you can not do it again in the future, right? It's very practical, and it's the same on the positive end of the spectrum. If good things happened to you in the past, then conceivably duplicating whatever you did to get those good things to happen could have them happen again in the future. So it's practical memory, and it's oriented towards action, and it's oriented towards like the quality of your life, not to the description of the objective world. So you need that instinct for meaning. You need it because life is really, really difficult. People have a rough time of it. There's plenty of suffering in life, and everyone is going to encounter it. You don't have to talk to someone for very long and really talk to them and get beneath the surface until you find, there's a tragedy or two or three or 10 lurking not very far beneath the surface. Someone in the family is very ill. There's a childhood history of extreme pathology, alcoholism somewhere in the family, maybe a touch of insanity, someone has cancer, an older relative is dying, there's financial trouble, there's economic trouble. It's like life is trouble. And that doesn't mean it's all trouble, but man, it's trouble. And sometimes it's a lot of trouble. And sometimes it's so much trouble that you can barely stand it. And you see that because people get depressed and they commit suicide. And the reason they do that is because they think not being is better than being. And it isn't just a matter of depression and suicide. That's bad enough. But, if you're unhappy because your suffering has pushed you past the point of your ability to cope, then there's all sorts of other things that can happen to you that aren't directed towards you. You can become cynical, and you can become bitter, and you can become cruel, and you can become narcissistic and deceitful and arrogant, and then you're out for revenge. That's a nice one. I don't know against who, but maybe everyone. Maybe even including you, because you're not happy about the role you've played in generating your own misery. I mean, there's a lot of darkness underneath the suffering, and that's an ever-present existential danger for human beings. We're aware of the future, we're aware of our fragility, we're aware of our mortality. It's something that makes us truly unique, truly conscious in a way that no other creature is, and capable of things that no other creature can do, but also bearing an unbelievably heavy existential load. We're the only creatures that have to always contend with the fact that we're finite, and that everyone we know is in the same position, that allied with the suffering. And so that's there all the time. If it's true intrinsically that life has this unbearable element of suffering, which seems to be completely indisputable as far as I'm concerned, and it's worse than that too, because it's not just suffering, it's suffering contaminated with malevolence, right? It's bad enough to have something bad happen to you, and it's likely that that'll happen. But it's even worse for you to do it to yourself and to know that you did it. That's rough. And it's also extraordinarily rough to be betrayed by someone else or, tyrannized by your own culture. And that's not just suffering. That's like unnecessary and pointless suffering that's been directed at you by something that wants that to happen. And so both of those are very, very powerful, let's say, archetypal forces, suffering and malevolence, and we have to deal with them at every level of reality. And you need something to push back against that. It's not optional if that's the default position, and I think it's the default position. Like, a meaningless life isn't meaningless. It's suffering and malevolence. That's not good. If you want to know why totalitarian states take the brutal twists they take and why people are motivated to do the absolutely terrible things that they do, well, that's why, is that the suffering and the malevolence that's intrinsic to life overwhelms them, and they turn in a very bad direction, and then they make everything that's already bad way worse, and we're very, very inventive at such things. And so that's not good, unless that's the path you want. That's a bad idea. You need an alternative, and that's meaning. To tell the truth implies that you know the truth. And you don't know the truth because you're too ignorant to know the truth. Like, you don't know the truth about anything fully, right? If you push your knowledge out far enough, if I ask you why about something you're doing enough times, it's usually only 3 or 4 times, by the way, you're out of answers, you don't know. And so you can't really tell the truth, but I think you can not lie. You know, and that's not even the same as not being wrong, because of course you're also going to be wrong, and you're going to have stupid theories too, and they're not even necessarily lies. A lie is when you know that what you're saying is not true and you say it anyways. That's a lie, and it's a lie that you've decided yourself on the basis of your own knowledge. That's a lie. It's not a good idea to say things that you know not to be true. And I would say, by the way, as a practical issue, it's also a worse idea to write things that you don't think are true. Because your mind is organized at the highest level of abstraction in language. And it's important that your mind is organized, because if you're not organized, then you're disorganized, and then things don't go well for you in the world, just like they don't go well for anything that's disorganized. And so you have to be very careful with what you say and what you write, writing especially, because it's focused speaking, it's focused speech, right? It takes more intense thinking. So in some sense, writing is even deeper than speaking. But you don't want to speak things that you believe to be untrue, and you certainly don't want to write them, because that changes you. And it changes you in the direction of the deception that you're undertaking while you do the speaking or the writing. And you might think, nah, I can write whatever I want and I can just leave it be, but that's not true. And the reason for that, in part, is because your knowledge is shallow. And so if you take rather shallow knowledge and then you write something detailed that's false, you end up convincing yourself in all sorts of ways that you don't even notice that what you wrote that was a lie was true. And then you're stuck with that. And it's not stuck with it psychologically exactly, although it's also that. It's stuck with it neurologically, because when you learn things and you make new connections, you change the structure of your brain. You're messing around with your psychophysiology, and that's a bad idea. If you want to get through the world, if you want to get from point A to point B, if you want to get to wherever you're going, it'd be good to have a map. And it'd probably be good to have a map that isn't full of holes and errors, because otherwise you're not going to get to where you're going. You might not even know where you are to begin with. And that seems like a bad plan if you're going to undertake a journey, and you are going to undertake a journey because your life is a journey. So pathologize your speech, then you pathologize the systems that guide you, and then that relates back to Rule 7, which is, well, you have an instinct for meaning, let's say, and it can guide you, and you need it. And then if you pathologize it by introducing material that you know to be untrue, then you distort and warp and pathologize the very structure, the very feeling that you need to place yourself firmly in the world. And then you can't rely on yourself. And this is a very bad idea, because you need to rely on yourself. especially in situations of crisis, you know, when you have difficult decisions to make. And it's like, well, it's not obvious whether I should go right or whether I should go left, right? Because there's a lot riding on both decisions, and so you're sweating it out. Or maybe you have 3 or 4 decisions to make at the same time. It's like you can talk to your friends and all that, but you're the guy in the final analysis, man. It comes down to you. And if you can't trust yourself because you filled yourself up with nonsense, then you'll make the wrong decision. And then, hey, maybe you'll pay for it for the rest of your life. And maybe you'll deserve to. That's what the damn education system is for. It's to develop you psychologically and spiritually and to turn you into a citizen, you know, into a competent human being. You compromise that because of expediency, an excuse usually. It's a very bad idea. I would highly recommend against never doing it. And I would say the same thing at work, whenever. It's very psychologically dangerous to say things you know not to be true. Okay, so the first thing I want to tell you about is a little bit about how you perceive things, because it's very important to know how you perceive things. And you don't perceive very much, by the way, because, well, there's a lot of the world, way more than you can possibly imagine, and there's not that much of you. And so a lot of information is coming in through a very narrow channel. And it isn't easy, given the fact that all that information exists, it isn't easy to figure out how to narrow that channel so that the information you get is the information that you need. You don't see the world that much. You screen a lot of it out. Now, you use the simplest possible perceptual scheme that you can manage to get yourself from point A to point B, right? It's a map. You don't see the world. You see an iconic representation of the world. And then the question is, what makes the iconic representation sufficient? And I suppose sufficient means a couple of things. One thing it means is tolerable, right? It doesn't cause an excess of suffering and degeneration. It has to be functional, right? And then, well, it has to work like a map works. A map is a low-resolution representation, but it's a good enough map if you use the map and you start at point A and you happen to be at point A, which is a good beginning for a map, and then you use the map and you get to point B and you think, good enough map. And that's us. That's how we think. That's how we construe the world. Our maps are really, the stories that we use in the world are really the maps we use to guide us. And so there are deep reasons for how you perceive things and why. And so that's what we're going to go into. So the first thing we're going to do is talk about the basics of perception. And perception is very, very tightly related to action, to movement forward, and to emotion. And those things are very important to know. They're very tightly associated. So, for example, you live in a map, let's say, or a story, and the story is wherever I am isn't as good as it could be, and so I'm going to go somewhere that's somewhat better. Maybe you've got a plan for the next minute. You know, you're hungry, and so you want to go somewhere to eat, or maybe it could be for the next hour, or the next week, or the next day, or the next year, or whatever. But basically what you're trying to do is take where you are, point A, and make it better, point B. And so you're always somewhere that isn't quite as good as it should be, and you're always going somewhere that's somewhat better. At least that's the hope. And it's kind of unfortunate in some sense, because it means you can't be satisfied with what you've got. But how the hell can you be satisfied with what you've got? Because you've got problems coming your way. You know, I mean, even if everything's okay right now, which it probably isn't, but even if it was, that doesn't mean everything's going to be okay tomorrow or next week or next year or 5 years from now. You've got the future to take care of, and your future self, and you've got your family to take care of, and maybe you've got your community to take care of. So you've got some problems. And so the way things are isn't good enough. And so you're going to fix them a bit. One thing you might think about is if you're mixed up, one of the problems you might have is that you don't know where you are. Lots of times people have to go to therapy or talk for a long time to someone to find out where they are, because your experience might have scattered you everywhere. You don't know where you are. And so then you're in trouble, because how the hell are you going to plot a course forward into the future if you don't know where you are? And so maybe you have to bring yourself up to date. And you can know if you need to be brought up to date. It's fairly straightforward. If you're obsessed by memories of the past, more than 18 months old, and most of those are negative, then there's a lot of you that's stuck in the past. And what that means is you didn't map the territory well enough, and the parts of your brain that are alarm systems, anxiety systems, are saying, No, there's holes in the way you're looking at the world. There's holes in the way that you're looking in the world. And you fell in them once, and you don't know where they are, and you don't know how to fill them, and you don't know how to walk around them, and so you can't forget them, you can't forget them, you can't forget them, you can't forget them. So you have recurring nightmares, for example, or a good example of that sort of thing happening. But in any case, if you have memories like that, you remember them, they make you feel anxious and negative, you're stuck back there. Your body is still reacting as if there's an emergency that could happen again that you haven't fixed. And it doesn't matter if it was your fault, that's irrelevant because the alarm system doesn't care. Like when your smoke detector goes off, it isn't relevant whether it was your fault. The smoke detector just says house is on fire, and that's a bad thing. And your anxiety systems are like that. If they're tagging old memories with anxiety, then you have to do something about it, or you will be tortured by those memories forever, because that's how the alarm system works. And so maybe you need to go back there and clean things up. You got to figure out, okay, well, how did this happen? What sort of role did I play? Even if it's a minor role, that doesn't matter, because the point is that you don't want to be put in the same vulnerable position again. So anything you can do to strengthen yourself is good. The way that your positive emotion systems work, they run on a neurochemical called dopamine, which, by the way, is the neurochemical system that drugs like cocaine and methamphetamine and alcohol for some people and opiates affect dramatically and make people feel far better than they should, which is part of their danger. It's a very fundamental system. The dopamine system kicks in with a kick of positive emotion if you're going somewhere that's worth going. And so that's worth knowing. It's really worth knowing. It's like, okay, you want a little bit of positivity in your life. Well, how do you get it? Well, you got to get the system, and it's happy when you have somewhere to go. That's the first thing. And then it's also happy when you're going there. So that's another thing to know. One thing you need to know is you need to be going somewhere, and there needs to be a pathway in order for you to feel good. The other thing to know is that if that plan is untenable or becomes destabilized, then what happens is you become flooded with negative emotion. Frustration, disappointment, anger, primarily anxiety. But all of those things sort of intermingle. Anger maybe because you have to fight your way through the obstacle. Frustration because maybe you have to make a new plan. Disappointment because you put a bunch of work into the damn plan and it didn't work out. Anxiety because now there's too many choices in front of you. And so people don't like to have their plans disrupted. And the reason for that is that their plans are directly associated with their emotional perception of the world. Well, why? Well, because it's annoying to have your plans changed. It disrupts the structure that you use to stabilize your perceptions of the world. And it throws you momentarily into a state of chaos. And so that's why you don't even like to lose arguments. You know, you lose a little argument, it's like, whoop, down the dominance hierarchy a bit, up, emotions are a bit destabilized. It's no damn way. I'm right. And why? Because I want to keep my neurochemistry in check. And no wonder. Well, the thing is, sometimes it's better to learn than to insist upon being right, because learning works better for the future. But you get the point. You know, you've seen bullseyes, classical archery bullseyes. They're red in the middle usually, right? And then there's a variety of colored circles around them. Maybe the whole bullseye is this big, and you're supposed to hit the bullseye, but the closer you get to the center, the better, but at least you could hit part of it. That would be good. And you're supposed to stand back and pull your arrow back and aim. And so that's an acting out of something. It's an acting out of the necessity of having an aim and taking your best shot. Now, and if you think about that, most of our sports are like that. Soccer's like that. Rugby's like that, basketball's like that, hockey's like that. Almost all team sports involve some sort of projectile going to some sort of target. And usually people organize themselves into hierarchies, 2 of them, because there's 2 teams, and then they compete and cooperate to get the projectile in the target. And for some reason, we think that's really cool. People will spend a fortune to go sit in an arena, like a long way away from the action, and there's these guys out there, and they're tough and they're fast, and they're fighting with this little black frozen disc, and they're trying to get it in a net while someone is trying to stop. It's completely bloody absurd, and Yet people are thrilled about it. They're thrilled, and they'll pay for it, right? They don't have to be dragged there kicking and screaming. Like they line up. It's, oh God, a hockey game. Thank God. And you think, what in the world is going on with that? It's like you're happier when that happens than you were when you got married. So, and let's not assume we're so stupid, even though we are. Let's not assume it. There's something behind this. It's like we really like to see people take careful aim and hit the target. And we really like to see them cooperate and compete in an expert manner to do that. And we really like to see them do that in a way that stretches their ability beyond what we would normally be able to see. And you think, right on. That's what a human being is like. And you're not really like that because you couldn't do it, but you are human, and conceivably you could do something like that. And so it's a nice display of that potential for us to hit the damn target. So then the question is, well, what's the target? And that's the question, because that's the same question as, what's the meaning? Here's my target, let's say. I'm typing. And when I'm typing, I'm moving my fingers, right? And that's not thinking. That's moving my fingers. And I don't really know how I move my fingers, but I can do it. And I can do it on a keyboard. And so I can type letters one at a time. And so you might say, well, what are you doing if you were watching me? And I'd say, well, I'm typing letters. That's my aim. So I'm pretty happy when I hit an A and an A appears, and I'm not that happy when I hit an A and an E appears and I have to backspace. A little annoyance there, right? Because I've shifted off the target. A little frustration. I fix it. That's okay. Back on track. But I'm not typing letters, because like, who wants to read a bunch of letters? No one. You want to read words. So I'm trying to organize the letters into words. So goal 1 is the letters, nested inside goal 2, which is the words. But you don't want just random words. That's not helpful. How about some phrases? That'd be good. How about some sentences? Letters, words, phrases, sentences. Now we're starting to get into units of meaning, right? And those are directions. They're like a map. They have a point. Like a book has a point. Like a story has a point. And the point is to outline the map properly. And then not just sentences, paragraphs. And those are organizations of sentences that make the sentences make sense, and the phrases, and the words, and the letters, all nested together. And not just paragraphs, chapters, right? And then chapters nested in a whole book. And then not just the whole bloody book, because that's not enough. The book doesn't work unless it's in a culture that's composed of maybe 1,000 books in some sense that are widely known by all of us, even if we haven't read them. I can assume that the reader is a mechanism that can understand what I've written, and that's part of where the meaning is too. And so that's all nested together, all of that, to make it meaningful for me to sit down in the morning and concentrate so foolishly, in some sense, on moving my fingers up and down on a keyboard. Right? What's meaningful about that? Well, nothing. Who cares if I type a letter? A single letter. Yeah, well, how about a word? How about the right word? How about the right phrase? How about the right sentence? Well, every movement outward, more broadly, makes it more meaningful. And if that whole structure is coherent, then all of the small actions become associated with the meaning of all of the large-scale actions, right? I'm not just typing letters. I'm writing a book. Why? Okay, then we get broader. This is the bullseye. This is the structure of the bullseye. The center might be the letter, That's one way of looking at it. That's the highest resolution thing. I've got to get that exactly right. And then it's nested inside all of these other structures. Well, I'm an educator. Okay, so I'm hoping the book will be educational. Well, why? Well, because maybe it would be better for people to be educated than not to be, so that they don't have to suffer so stupidly, and so they could be less malevolent, and that the world would be a less brutal place. That would be all right, right? And I'm doing that maybe because I want to be a good person, something like that. Okay, so now we're a long ways out in the moral hierarchy, and so now we might think about, well, what does it mean to be a good person? Does that mean something? Well, you think it does, because you know people who are good people, and you know people who aren't good people, and you make a qualitative distinction between them, and you know when you're being a good person and when you're not, and you make a qualitative distinction between that too. So here's some ideas. What does a good person do? Well, they take care of themselves. And so that means don't be so damn useless, and constrain some of your malevolence. And that's a good, meaty, bloody war to get involved in. It's not trivial. It gives you something to do when you get up in the morning. And then it might be the same with your social organization, your family. It's like your family could use some work, man. Just like everybody's family, and you might be able to help. And the company you work for, same thing. Like there's work to do in most organizations. A little honesty and a little hard work on your part might straighten that thing out just a little bit. And God only knows what the consequences of that would be across time. And then, you know, there's natural worries that you might want to take care of. There's diseases to conquer, and there's children to take care of, and there's food to provide, and all of the things that go along with that, so that you could involve yourself in taming and regulating the natural world, and that would be a good thing. So there's 3 sources of meaning. Get yourself under control. See what you can do about the tyranny of culture, and see what you can do about the civilization of nature, right? That's the construction of a walled garden. That's what paradise means, to get the balance between civilization and nature right. That's your goal, so people can live in there in peace and harmony, including you. That's a good goal. And then you think, well, that's going out quite a ways, you know? You're the culture hero who's taking on your own malevolence and ignorance, the tyranny of your culture and the cruelty of nature. Great. We need more people like you. Go for it. So here's how I think we are. You build systems of habit. Anything you practice enough, it's habit. So you're deterministic at the habit level, but you're not deterministic at the level of consciousness. Because consciousness comes into play when you're doing something that you haven't done before. And so that's interesting, because what it means is the conscious you is dealing with the world that isn't determined yet. And I would say it's actually dealing with the world of possibility, the world of potential. And it's a world we believe in. You say to people, you're not living up to your potential. And you say that to yourself too, you know, when you wake up at night and you're guilty. I'm not living up to my potential. And you don't feel good about that. And you think, well, there's potential around you that you're not exploiting. You know, and you feel bad about that too. And you should. So it's a good source of guilt and shame. Not enough to crush you maybe, but enough to wake you up. And it's certainly not something you hope for the people that you love. It's okay, you're wasting your potential. It doesn't matter. It's like no one says that. And so we're contending with potential. And we know that because we wake up in the morning and poof, we're awake. Like the sun has risen again, we're awake. And we confront the world. And what do we confront? We confront the possibilities, the potential, and the horror of the day. Here's the things we could do. Here's the things that could go bad. Here's how we could make things go better. And you know what that is. It's usually, there's 3 or 4 things that I need to do today that I'd rather avoid. But I better do them, because if I don't do them, the world will be a worse place by 6 o'clock tonight. Right? And that's a funny thing, because the world isn't like that yet. It isn't made like that yet. It won't be made like that until you make it. And you might think, well, here's some things I could do that would be good, that would actually make the world a better place by 6 o'clock tonight. Take some effort, you know, and the willingness and some aim, but you could do that. You can make it slightly better than it was, and certainly slightly less worse than it could be. And you know that, it weighs on you, I would say, as soon as you wake up. It might be a moral burden, or it might be excitement, or it might be some combination of both. But that's certainly how you view yourself. A conscious agent, confronting what has not yet been brought into being, confronting potential, and determining the course that the world's going to take. Maybe just in your small area, but who knows how big your area is and how much what you do echoes around you. You know, we have an idea in our culture that each of us is the center of the world. That's why you're part of the sovereign state. That's why you vote. That's why the future of the state itself is dependent on your decision. Because we've decided over like a 10,000-year period that you're king. You, for whatever reasons, it's on you. Your conscious ability to be awake and to be articulate and to be clued in and to keep nature at bay and culture straight and your own malevolence under check and to combat the unknown and to transform it into something that's good. That's what you are. And you see this reflected in the oldest stories. That's the dragon myth, you know? You go out into the terrible unknown, beyond what we understand, into the unknown itself. And you confront the terrible thing that rests there, the terrible predatory, eternal predatory monster. And you can do that because that's what you're like. You're not cowering at home. You're not frozen into submission. You're out there active, and you can take it on. And as a consequence, you can attain something of substantive value, right? And that's you. That's the transformation of you, because now you're braver because you've done it, but it's also something now that you've garnered from the potential, and you can bring that back and you can distribute that into the community. That's the story of humanity. It's the oldest story we have, and it's correct. So there's this idea in Genesis that at the beginning of time, there was potential. It was nothing. Like the nothing that's there when you wake up in the morning, that's just the potential of the day. It's all sorts of things that could be, but nothing that is. And then there's a structure that confronts it. Well, that's you. There you are, the structure that confronts potential. And then there's the personality that you use to confront it. So in Genesis, the personality is logos, and it's something like truthful courage and communicative ability, all amalgamated. It's something like that. So, and it's a lesson. It's like, okay, there's the potential. What are you supposed to do with it? Well, there you are, ready to confront it. How do you confront it? With truth and courage. And then you transform it into what exists. You take the potential and you transform it into being itself. That's your job. If you confront potential with truth and courage, then what you produce is good. Well, so that's a good thing to know if you want to produce what's good. It's like confront the potential with truth and courage, and what you produce is good. Great. So that's a nice thing to know. It's a fundamental ethical axiom, and it's sort of predicated on faith. It's not easy to be courageous, and it's not easy to tell the truth. But the theory is if you manage both of those in the face of potential, then what you do is you produce out of potential what is good. So that's a theory worth investigating, perhaps for the rest of your life. There's this strange line, which is probably the most important line that's ever been written in our culture, at the basis of our culture. And that is that men and women are made in the image of God. And what does that mean? Well, if God is that which confronts potential with truth and courage and makes what's good out of potential, that seems to indicate that we have the same faculty. Like on a smaller scale, we're not omniscient, but we're not bloody well nothing. You know, our conscience is integrally tied into the structure of being in some manner we don't understand. And it certainly is the case that we take what isn't and turn it into what is. That's something, man. That's quite the trick we've been able to manage. And so we're made in that image. And so what are we supposed to do? Well, that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to type our letters and make our phrases and construct our sentences and build our paragraphs and put our chapters together and make our books and communicate to people and straighten out the damn culture and constrain the malevolence and ignorance that besets each of us and push nature back and extend ourselves out into the unknown and confront the potential that's there in illimitable quantities and make the world better than it could be otherwise. To move it away from hell, and it can certainly become that, and toward heaven to the degree that we can manage that. And that is a good enough goal. That's the thing. You need something, because your life is tough. It's hard. You need something that, you need something to get out of bed for and fight for. And that's something, right? To fight, let's say, against hell and for heaven. That's something to fight for, especially. And if you want to be convinced about this, like read a little bit about hell. Read the Gulag Archipelago, or read Ordinary Men, or read The Rape of Nanking, or read about what happened in Nazi Germany during Auschwitz and all the catastrophes of the 20th century, and see if you believe in hell, and see if you think, well, maybe not having that happen anymore would be a good idea. And then think about maybe that's something you could contribute to. And then it wouldn't have to happen anymore. And that would be a good thing, and God only knows what great things we could manage under such conditions. We're becoming incredibly technologically powerful. And what would it be like if we became equally wise? Well, that would really be something. God only knows what we could manage in the next 20 years or the next 100 years, We're running at 40%, most of us, because we're half in and half out. And it's not surprising, because life is difficult. It's like, well, what if you were 90% in, or 95% in, or all in? Because you're all in anyways, right? It's a life and death game. No one gets out of this. Everyone dies. You might as well commit yourself. And you might as well commit yourself to the highest good that you can attain, because why not? It'll imbue your life with meaning. It's hard, the responsibility is there, but all the meaning's in the responsibility, and that'll make your life better. It'll make your family's life better, and it should make your culture better. Maybe it make the world better. It's like, that'll justify your damn miserable existence at 3 o'clock in the morning when you're wondering what the hell you're doing here. And that's a good thing, because there's going to be days when you're aching and tired and sore, and there's people in your family that are sick, and you're cynical and bitter, and you need a reason to get up, and you think, yeah, well, a little more heaven and a little less hell, maybe I can pull that off today and tomorrow and next week. And that's worth struggling forward for. And so that's how it looks to me. So thank you very much.